established the so-called DFL hygiene protocol, which is, I don't know, 50, 60 pages long, and which foresees a lot of different measures how clubs could come back, meaning come back to training in the first place, then come back to team training with contact, and then finally come back to a match and to competitions. And yeah, this detailed work combined with the more or less mild situation of COVID-19 in Germany allowed us to come back so fast, and also to get over some obstacles that of course we had in all this process, and maybe we'll come to the more critical points later. But indeed, I think we were in Germany the first sport or the first bigger association that had such a detailed concept, and that made it possible to talk with the political authorities about a restart quite early, because there too in Germany, as we are a federal state, we've got 16 different legislations in the different länder, and so each club had to talk with his authorities. Then we had to take back the results to DFL, where general assemblies were held nearly every 2 weeks in order to have such close discussion and close talks about how to resume.
So we've attached, if you look in your materials, there's a section that says documents. And if anybody is interested in looking at the German return to play protocol, yeah, it's about a 50-page document, and we've attached it there in English if anybody wants to read that. It's quite specific, Jonathan. It's there are very specific rules. If I recall, they separated the stadiums into 3 zones. The first zone being the field itself and the technical areas, so basically the ground level. A second level being inside the stadium or the stands, and then a third level being the necessary personnel, basically at the gates of the stadium, just outside of the physical structure. And so the DFL has provided very specific guidelines that you can have your 22 players, your 18 substitutes, your 5-team referees. I believe it was 10 coaches, trainers, physios, a certain number of cameramen, photographers. We're not going to have 50,000 photographers there. There are 3, and they have to be pool photographers that share their work product with other organizations. But there's a very specific number, and from the field level, there can be no more than 100 people anywhere in that field zone, which includes the dressing rooms or the locker rooms, at any time before, during, or after the match. So, can you kind of walk us through, as you've seen the first couple of match days progress, what have been the biggest, other than the lack of fans, what have been the biggest differences you've noticed?
Yeah, you mentioned we've got a maximum of 300 person allowed in these 3 zones altogether in Bundesliga, and a little bit less in second Bundesliga. At a normal match day, of course, here in Stuttgart, we have got more than 1,000 people working, only for working, without any spectators. So it's really an immense reduction, which implies also that the TV production is made by the minimum of people necessary. Everything was taken down to the minimum, and that of course makes the ambience totally different. Then also what everybody sees here in Germany is that football as a TV sport or the TV event absolutely changed, as there's no more stadium atmosphere, which is something we are quite proud of in Germany, that we've got lots of fans, supporters that are making good atmosphere. We don't have this anymore, but instead now you can hear the coaches coach their teams on TV, or you even can hear the referee talking with the video assistant while reviewing the video, because it's so silent, and you via the TV microphones you can hear everything. So one of our main TV partners, Sky, they now offer a second audio option where they, for the TV transmissions, they offer a stadium atmosphere, which is quite good. It's really realistic if you choose this option, but that shows how things change also for the fans and the supporters. Then we also noticed some effects on the sport and on the sporting competition, as now we have played 2.5 match days behind closed doors, and the number of away wins increased incredibly. I think we are about 50% away wins. So it's only 2.5 match days, but I suppose if this development continues, we will be able to see that there is something called home effect, or that the home team really profits from its supporters, and if they're not there anymore, it's more an equal game between the two clubs. And on the other side, maybe as you also mentioned, everything was reduced, so we only have 4 ball boys anymore around the stadium, and on the other hand, we have lots of balls that are situated near to the pitch, which allows teams as a tactical mean to really try to do some fast throw-ins, because the balls are already there, and so it allows you to modify your tactics a little bit, and it's in some details it's different, but in the end, I think, and that's what also the surveys taken by TV channels say, people who were quite skeptical about these matches behind closed doors, now I think the big majority of TV viewers and of fans is really happy that football is back, and that you really can watch a match behind closed doors as well as another match.
So the statistic I saw sometime over the weekend in the middle of this second round of matches was that in the Bundesliga, only 3 home teams in 22 matches had won. So it really did flip the script in terms of the home team advantage. I also thought it was very interesting to see what some teams are doing to try to create atmosphere. Borussia Mönchengladbach, for example, has they will have, I think, over 12,000 were installed in the last match date, and 20,000 will have been ordered. They have allowed fans to buy cardboard cutouts of themselves. So somebody could either take a picture or a selfie, and a company had volunteered to put together these cardboard cutouts of people and install them in the stadiums where people normally sit. And so the visual effect was that it looked like you had a pretty full lower level of the stadium, and that was kind of cool also to see as different teams experiment with unique ways of giving back some atmosphere. But there were also, in Germany, there's a huge fan culture. It's what it's known for. And I know that a lot of the concerns were, what happens if fans start congregating outside the stadiums during matches? It looks like that risk has been averted, but what did you have to do to encourage your supporter groups to stay at home when matches may be played at your stadium?
Yeah, that's an important point. I agree. And let me add something to your Mönchengladbach example. They also offered this possibility to the away fans. So yesterday, there weren't only Mönchengladbach fans, but also some Leverkusen fans who were there printed out in the away stands, which was also quite a nice sign, I think. Regarding the concerns about fans' behavior, I think that was something that was brought forward especially by people and also by some politicians who were skeptical against the football's restart, also by some policemen saying that maybe the fans the ultra scene, as we say in Germany, so the hardcore fans, who are quite critical against matches behind closed doors. Maybe they might gather in front of the stadiums and cause some trouble and don't abide to the rules. But the opposite was the case. And I think we at the clubs, we weren't surprised by that, because we luckily have quite a good dialogue, even with the hardcore fan scene. And so we didn't expect them to behave in a manner that was against the rules. So nothing happened. And in the contrary, I think during the last weeks or months, especially the fan scenes here in Germany showed that they really understand the situation, and they created lots of organizations to help elder people, to help ill people, to go shopping for them. And I think it was really a good sign that the fan scene, although there's no football, they care about the club and the city, and they don't make any problems at all. Maybe let me add one other point in this regard, because I think the more serious concern was what would happen at the homes. If our main TV partner Sky, you only can see the TV transmissions if you've got a subscription. And there, I think there was a real risk that maybe lots of people who don't have a subscription but want to see the matches go to some friends or to some pubs and gather there illegally, because we still have contact restrictions and social distancing regulations in Germany. In this regard, we also were lucky. And so you think, you see in Germany, I think we really had lots of aspects that were favorable to an early restart, but there we could find an agreement with our TV partner Sky that for the first 2 match days after restart, they showed Bundesliga free on air. So you didn't need a subscription for these 2 weeks, but could see all the matches at home, which really relaxed the situation. And also from this point of view, I haven't heard anything that there have been serious problems with people gathering in numbers that weren't allowed anymore.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. So Alberto, let's turn to you. We've talked a little bit about Germany, but obviously Europe is far more expansive than just the Bundesliga. You know, I talked a little bit in the introduction about European leagues having a pretty broad group of members, leagues that are smaller and larger in size. So let me just start asking more of a general question about, I've seen, for example, Belarus decided to continue playing on a little bit longer than most of the other leagues. Some of the leagues just completely shut down immediately. As Fernando said, some leagues have completely canceled the season and others have suspended it. So, you know, it must be a bit of a task to be able to have to speak for such a large group of leagues that have many different interests. But, you know, how do you see things sitting at the moment?
Yeah. First of all, thanks to you. Thanks also to Fernando for inviting me to join this interesting conversation. Yes, of course. I mean, the situation is diverse from country to country, but also because the virus is having an impact that is diverse from country to country, and also the restriction that have been applied by the various governments has been diverse from country to country. So that there is a different response in any country, and this is an impact on the whole society in all the industries, and of course also in the football industry. We, in our organization, we represent 36 leagues for 30 countries. You actually mentioned Russia is one of the countries not member of our organization, because only those countries that they have a league with an independent entity separated by the respective federation is member of our organization. And as you might be aware, there are, let's say, medium and small countries where the leagues are organized by, let's say, the competition department of the respective federation, and there are no independent league, and this is the decision has been, let's say, taken by the Belarusian Federation, but we have no particular contact with them. Having said that, it is good to stress that most of the leagues are actually working on their assumption, and actually this week and these days will be particularly important because following the Bundesliga, and we have to stress, of course, that it has been definitely positive, the return of the Bundesliga, in order to create a positive trend for all the leagues, for all the federation, but also for all the governments. Also the decision of the German government to giving green light for the Bundesliga to restart has been definitely also push a bit other governments around Europe. I might ask maybe Colette if can upload on the screen a map that we have created. I guess it might be particularly interesting to understand that actually following the Bundesliga during the upcoming days, there will be other leagues that will resume their competition. Actually, the first one has been the Czech Republic League yesterday, but other leagues during the upcoming weekend, from Israel to Poland to Portugal very soon, Austria, they will resume very quickly. Some other, the one that you see in, let's say, yellow color, they are in current negotiation with the respective governments. A few of them, they already received green light to start. And it is the case in Spain, where we are expecting a decision in Italy this week. There's been a decision in Greece today, actually, that the competition will start on the 6th of June. So actually, we will have a more green map basically later this week, and this is definitely positive. I might say that most probably, despite we are not entering in any political, of course, decision, maybe the decision has been taken in France, in the Netherlands, has been a bit premature, taking into consideration the evolution of the virus and also the evolution of the protocols that has been developed by the various countries. It still is good to see that most of the countries, they will not even need it to work on the guidelines that have been provided. Fernando was mentioning this. That's been provided by UEFA on those potential leagues that will not finish the competition, because most of the leagues will finish their competition. We have been mentioning the work that we have been doing from a calendar point of view. Fernando mentioned in the beginning the decision has been taken. Actually, to be fair, has been a joint resolution taken by the 4 stakeholders: UEFA, the European leagues, the organization I represent, FIFPro, the World Players Union, and the ECA back on the 17th of March, actually to postpone the Euro and to allow the domestic, let's say, professional club competition to resume, because it's not only about leagues competition, it's also about UEFA club competition, the Champions League and the Europa League that will resume during the month of August. So that there's been a huge coordination work with, I have to say, with a great cooperation spirit between the stakeholders, especially between us, the European leagues, and UEFA. Why? Because we are, let's say, the one representing the competition organizer. Ultimately, of course, our members are domestic level, but a huge coordination work in terms of calendar, so to allow the domestic leagues to finish by the end of July. Actually, the leagues, they are ranked between the National Association between 16 and 55. They will have to finish by the 20th of July, while the top 16 they will have time to finish by the 3rd of August, allowing then UCC, the UEFA Club competition, to play during the month of August. So that this is vital, of course, for the economy of club football in Europe. You were mentioning in the beginning, Bob, the fact that the resumption of competition is vital for the economy of football, and also because most of the top leagues, they rely, of course, in their broadcasting deal. It's also fair to say that the smaller is a country, the smaller is a league. We have a lot of medium and small leagues in Europe, right? The smaller is a league, the more they rely on match operation and on ticketing and hospitality, so that is of course good for the top countries to back and have, let's say, respect their contractual obligation with the broadcaster. it is still important to stress that for most of the clubs all around Europe, medium and small clubs, they will still face a lot of financial difficulties in playing behind closed doors, because not having the possibility to having their fans attending, we are talking maybe about lower, of course, attendance with respect to the Bundesliga or the Premier League or La Liga, but still important for their economy, so that it is definitely important to finish the competition. Fernando was mentioning at the beginning also the fact that it's not only about economy. The fact to finish the competition, it means also to respect the integrity of the competition itself. It means to have a proper champion, to have a list of clubs that are qualified for UEFA Club competition for next season, to have clubs that are promoted or have clubs that are relegated, because in Europe we work in a different way. If we compare with the American system, there is a pyramidal structure where the leads out of promotion and relegation. We need to safeguard the system of promotion and relegation, and we need to safeguard also the system of sporting merits, because the system of promotion and relegation is based on sporting merit. What is definitely important is the fact that the European stakeholders and UEFA will respect the decision that will be taken at domestic level. This is something fundamental, leaving, of course, full independency to domestic leagues in cooperation with their respective federation to take the decision. Of course, there might be certain implication, but ultimately the decision will have to be taken at national level also, because as I was referring earlier, the situation is so diverse from country to country. As Fernando said, there will be some legal cases all across Europe, but what is important is that the sporting merit and the sporting meritocracy will be applied all over the country.
So Alberto, you talked about stakeholders, and I think that's a really important discussion to come back to. If we look at football in Europe or around the globe, we have the governing bodies like FIFA and UEFA. We've got the leagues themselves. We've got the teams that are involved. We've got the players. What has it been like trying to coordinate a return to play when you're trying to balance the interests of so many different groups?
Well, we have been mainly focusing with the stakeholders on three pillars. As I said, first pillar, the coordination of the calendar and creating calendar opportunities for the leagues to resume and for UCC to resume. There's been a lot of work in terms of regulatory framework and financial framework. These, of course, together with our sister organization, the World Leagues Forum, we brought, of course, our league's position to FIFA when it comes to the drafting of this temporary COVID regulatory framework. And we are all expecting a version 2.0 of this document that should be issued by FIFA in the upcoming days. That is something I think needed, because despite the document, it is clear we need still certain answer to be given by FIFA to all the clubs when it comes to contractual obligation and relation between clubs and players. There's been work done by the European stakeholders when it comes also to club licensing and financial fair play. Our position here has been quite clear. We believe as European leagues that we need a proper implementation of the financial fair play. We don't need to use this crisis to relax financial fair play measures. Actually, when there is financial difficulties, it is important that there are proper cost control mechanisms, both at domestic level but also by European level. We cannot allow that, let's say, the big clubs could work or extend their debts or whatsoever, because we definitely have to defend, and you might be aware that this is our main flex, to defend as much as possible competitive balance. And you defend competitive balance by not allowing widening the financial gaps that exist between, let's say, a small group of big clubs and all the rest. And the financial fair play is also a mechanism that allows to control this financial gap that exists. At the third pillar, as was mentioned by Jonathan, been a huge coordination work when it comes to development of protocols. And here we have really to praise the work that's been doing by all the leagues at domestic level. The approach has been diverse. I mean, Bundesliga developed one unique protocols. Some other leagues have been developing different protocols. One is just related to training, other are just related to match operation, other might be in relation to production. They work in a different way. There are no better protocols. All protocols are good, but it is important to stress the incredible spirit of cooperation between the leagues. They have been learning from each other, sharing information, sharing experience, sharing also technicalities on the development of the protocol. And it's also important to say that all this work that's been performed will be also instrumental for UEFA for developing their own protocols for the resumption of UCC, because at the end of the day, are the leagues at domestic level that have been developed, the first protocols, that have been in negotiation with the respective governments. So that huge work also from a protocols point of view, and with the various stakeholders. Once again, I mentioned them: European leagues, FIFPro, ECA, and UEFA in Europe, and then FIFA in the World Leagues Forum for us when it comes to our relation at world level. So these have been the three main areas we have been working on with the stakeholders. Let me stress once again the good spirit of cooperation. It's not often the case. Sometimes we have all our position, but a lot of solidarity among the stakeholders during this period.
I appreciate that, and we'll come back to a couple of those issues. I want to loop in David at this point to talk about some of the U.S.-based leagues and what they're doing to get back to play. David, just this week we're starting to see various releases through the media, sometimes through the leagues, as some of the U.S. leagues look to return to play. All of the U.S. leagues are looking at a much later return than the Bundesliga. We're hearing things in late June, early to late July. So it's a different timetable because the virus has a different timetable. But what are you hearing in terms of what the leagues in the U.S. are contemplating, and maybe as part of that, which of the American sports do you think has a chance to be the first to get back to playing sooner rather than later?
Well, thanks, Bob. And obviously, the importance of sport is something that's very much ingrained in our culture here in the United States, as is many places. And even the president, think what you may of him, love him or hate him, has made comments about the need for a return for sports. And he's someone that has had some very public feuds with the NFL and some other leagues as of late, with some of the political things that have gone on within the sport, with particular players especially. So I think there was a desire for sports to return. There is such a tremendous appetite for it. And I think the leagues realize that and want to provide that content for the masses. There's really a couple different approaches that the leagues are taking right now. And the NHL is talking about, the National Hockey League is talking about potentially 1 or 2 cities where they would have a larger tournament to sort of finish off the season and ultimately award the Stanley Cup. Obviously, the NBA is talking about a single city model, as is as MLS, and they're talking about going to Walt Disney World, where you have a huge number of hotel rooms that are right now sitting vacant, and a pretty ample facility with the Wild World of Sports complex, which is basically it's been a very much a youth sports complex, but they've got lots of fields and basketball arenas, and kind of creating more of a bubble. The interesting thing about that particular model is you can keep everyone within that bubble and not have to travel. Everyone can be in some common areas as far as a team standpoint, because everyone's been tested. Even you can potentially bring families in. It does make things a lot easier. Anytime you introduce the element of a movement, a personnel movement, it could potentially increase risk. If you're getting on a plane, I mean, how well was that plane cleaned? If you're getting on a bus, how well was that bus cleaned? But if you keep everything sort of self-contained, then you can use the same bus for the same team. You can have potentially some of the other service personnel that were needed, such as not just the players, obviously the coaches, the athletic trainers, the physicians and equipment managers, but someone's going to have to help serve them food. So I mean, maybe some of the food service personnel stay within that bubble too. Maybe some of the cleaning personnel, security personnel, everyone would stay within that particular bubble and within a particular unit, so you can sort of cordon them off. There are talks about going to the empty stadium model, but again, if you're going from city to city to city, you're introducing a lot more risk. We may get to that point at some points. Obviously, I think the farther along we go and the more time we get, the more we get behind us, the more that model is going to be looking, probably a lot more positively. But I think at this point, probably the smaller scale. I think if any sport is going to go with the empty stadium model at this point, it's probably going to be, baseball towards the tail end. They're right now talking about spring training facilities, and they've got two nerve centers between the Grapefruit League and the Cactus League, obviously between Florida and Arizona. And every team already has a facility and can sort of stay within those facilities and just travel to the other facilities to play the games. Obviously, this time of year, that brings another whole host of issues because the temperature is not very, very nice during the day. It's kind of tough on players, especially in Arizona, to have a lot more evening games. And does that really work well if you've got an East Coast team that has a spring training operation in Arizona? Playing a 7 o'clock game in Arizona is really 10 o'clock in the East Coast. So it really does bring out another whole host of challenges. So I think there's a lot of moving parts at this point to be worked out. As far as sports that I think are going to come back first, and we've already seen a few MMA events and such that are there. But for me, I look beyond the big five, and I think golf is going to be the first one you see back because it's the most conducive to a return. There's a potential for actually playing the game without any contact whatsoever. I mean, even here in the U.S., the golf courses are open. I played a few days ago. They just, you just keep away from other people. You don't have to touch their ball. You keep the flag in, and you really don't have any other contact with. You may have a caddy, but again, if you bubble off the caddy with yourself and your two families, then maybe that's the next place that works. So I actually think golf, just because the nature of the sport, and then perhaps after that, tennis may be one that's not long after, because really the only contact is with the ball to the racket. But could you change balls every game so whoever's serving is the one that would be touching the balls? And obviously you'd have to have some ball personnel, but could you figure out some ways? And I think that's something that the experts would have to weigh in on. I really think that that's something that the leagues are doing really, really well at this point, is they're engaging the right experts because they have to. And it's something that I learned having gone through with one of the teams I was with, some bacterial issues, surrounding a few of the players we have, is, really, bring in the experts, talk to some of those people. We parachuted some people down that were the infectious disease experts, and not just about the treatment of infectious diseases, but really about the methods of transmission. And we really relied on them to help us come up with the right protocols. And I know that the leagues are doing the same thing, because they're going to need to get everything together and make sure that every cleaning protocol was right, using the right detergents at the right time, for the right in the right concentrations. Are you keeping the right, the right distances? Are you cleaning at the right intervals? I mean, every little piece, and there's so many different parts of it. Are you putting the sanitation stations the right place? And that's not something that's very easy for a layperson to figure out. I mean, really, there's a lot of experts that have a lot of knowledge in that area that you really can lean on. So it's not something that should be done in a vacuum. And I think that the smart leagues are really taking a multidisciplinary approach, and not just from a league perspective. I think even from just general business, you're bringing in folks from different areas. They're talking to the medical people, they're talking to the legal people, getting that perspective. They're talking to the HR people. They're engaging their unions in their workforce, because obviously the unions have a pretty strong interest in trying to keep their contingent players safe. And something else that people may not think about is, perhaps engage your insurance carrier, because even though a lot of general liability policies have some exclusions for microbial transmissions, there still could be some causes of action that are raised. I mean, we've seen it before in a few different places. If you really study it, with not so much with the coronavirus at this point, but with some other different bacterial diseases that have spread in a couple of facilities. So they may, even though there may be an exclusion from a direct infection, there may be some other cause of action that would trigger coverage. And so the insurance carriers are going to have a very strong interest and want to help you prevent those claims rather than deal with it on the backside. So, taking that multidisciplinary approach is important. from a contractual standpoint, the important thing to know as far as the players is that the unions are really going to have a lot of influence. It's important to note that yes, every player has their individual contract, but that's governed and that operates under the umbrella of a collective bargaining agreement, which is basically between the union and the leagues that covers everyone. So if the two sides agree that a contract that would have expired at the certain date because the season was extended, they could push that back and then totally change the calendar within their collective bargaining agreement. So I think that, and you're hearing about all the leagues and talking about the negotiation that's going through, and I know that there's some discussions and some apprehensions on both sides. I mean, I read about what's happening in baseball right now, and there's apprehension the league has of going to a model where the players would get a percentage of revenue, because that is almost a precursor in the union to a salary cap, because that's exactly the way the salary cap is factored in several of the other major sports in the United States. So I think from that perspective, there's going to be some dialogue, and there's going to have to be some creativity and some flexibility. And when we do ultimately start coming back, I think the next thing that the leagues and the teams are going to have to really focus on is keeping the spectators safe as well, keeping the attendees safe, because it's not just about the players, it's the people have got to be comfortable actually going to the game and attending the game.
Let's talk about that for a second, because I want to incorporate not just you, but Dr. Labus and the others, because returning the spectators to the stadium, I think we could do a separate webinar just on that topic. So, let's talk about that a little bit. Let me ask Dr. Labus first, and Dave will come back to you in a second. But, are we going to be able to get spectators back into stadiums in limited ways, do you think, in the near to medium term?
Sorry, muted there. I think this is a lot trickier than dealing with the teams, because as David was talking about, you can kind of keep those players in a bubble where you can control everything about it. You can test everybody and make sure there's no transmission. And when you're talking about the fans, you have to think about who's coming to that game. It's not just the local fans. There are people who are going to travel for this as well. So there's a lot more than just people walking into the stadium to think about. It's all the restaurants around the stadium and people congregating outside and potentially bringing tens or 50,000 people together for these events for a very short amount of time. And that depends on what's happening in each individual city. So a city that's having a much tougher time with the outbreak isn't going to return fans as quickly as a city that's been able to control theirs pretty well and has the resources to continue to do so. So even though the leagues may be able to come up with a plan that works for their teams, it's really going to be up to each municipality to decide what they're going to do with fans and how they can best return fans to those arenas. There may be some arenas that we can get to the end of the season never really able to return fans. If you look at a place that's hardest hit like New York City, I'm guessing they'd be a little less likely to bring their fans back earlier than a place that's not having the same challenges. So that's a completely different situation with a lot more people crammed together in close contact. It's not like you want to open the stadium at 5% capacity and just have a few people randomly yelling during the event. It's not going to be the same atmosphere as Jonathan talked about. They were very proud of that atmosphere, and you've completely changed that as well if you're decreasing the number of fans and putting in a bunch of restrictions on them.
David, I know you deal with a lot of risk management issues. You also have a really unique background for a sports lawyer. You've worked in management side, but I think what a lot of people don't necessarily know about you is that for a decade, you were a certified athletic trainer in professional baseball. So, knowing that you have a health background as well as a sports background, how do you foresee, once we can start reintroducing fans into arenas, how do you see that looking? What kind of modifications are arenas and teams going to need to make in order to be able to successfully and gradually reintroduce fans into that atmosphere?
I think you have to look at it as two different pieces of it. And the first is, protecting the players from everything that the fans bring in, but also protecting the fans from transmission within, within the stands. And I think there's two sort of different pieces to it. So the days of, players signing autographs before the game, may be gone for a while. I mean, that may not come back. I mean, if you figure that the amount of contact and getting so close to fans, it may be that there's little to no interaction, personal interaction or close-up interaction. It used to be that a lot of players within the NFL, a lot of families and a lot of special guests within the NFL would come down on the field and watch pregame warm-ups. I mean, if you watch any game, you would have seen just hundreds and hundreds of people that are on the sideline that have to be cleared. I think that those days are gone. I mean, baseball, you bring a VIP out to watch batting practice, and they stand there and they watch, maybe get an autograph or two. I think it's going to be very much more, this area, in that area, and there's not going to be much crossover between the two. And even with the personnel, I mean, you're not going to have someone that's doing security that's up in the stands that has to come down onto the field area. You're going to have very distinct lines, and you're in one area or the other. I think from a fan perspective, it's going to be very, very interesting to see how they space it out, to see the measures that they take. But I really think it's going to have to be quite a collaboration between medical people and the healthcare experts, the public health experts that are out there, along with the teams, to figure out how can we do this well. There are ways that we can bring people in without a bottleneck as we scan tickets. Are there ways that we can, even if we put fans of 4 and then we have 4 seats in between them so a family can come and sit together, what do those pockets look like? How do they get concessions? How do they go to the restrooms? I mean, all these little things. How do they leave at the end of the night? I mean, it's possible, but it's all part of that experience, and it's going to take time to figure out. Even when you're no fans, I mean, we talked about the ambiance and putting in the cardboard cutout. I'd heard similar things about the potential of NFL teams piping in crowd noise just to kind of simulate things a little bit more. Not only does that affect the players, but it also affects what comes through on the broadcast, because people are so used to hearing the sounds of the ballpark as they watch a baseball game or a hockey game or whatever the sport is. So I think that that's a piece of it too. But even if you have a smaller scale, is that sound still going to be a part of it? And how is it going to affect the outside, but those that are watching on the broadcast? But I think it's going to happen. I think over time, as things change and things develop, the answer is going to become much more clear to us. If there is a viable vaccine that comes out, that could be a game changer as far as what we do and how we approach things. Now, obviously, if it takes a lot longer, or we have these, secondary surges of infections, then that could be another factor that goes the other way. Also, if there's some sort of a mutation of the virus and it comes back strong again, and it's in somewhat of a different form, that could set us back. So there's so much that we don't know, and that's why I go back to that idea of really engaging the experts, because they're the ones that are where the rubber meets the road with this virus. They know what's going on, and they're the ones that really are keeping in touch with the science and are talking to the other experts that know the way things are going and the trends. I think that they're going to have to really take a lead. I mean, you talk about teams that are now talking about hiring a chief hygiene officer that does nothing but really takes a look at the cleanliness practices and makes sure that everything is done right for the team. And I think it's a great addition in the sports world, because there's so much potential for interpersonal contact and spreading of any kind of disease. You have so many people that are in close quarters, and I mean, traditionally, you had an equipment guy who, maybe he was told this is how you launder things. But if you don't launder things the right way, you don't drip well enough, then there's a lot of different diseases and microbial things that can be passed through commonly washed laundry. So you've got to do it the right way, and having someone with that expertise that can really take a look at it and say, this is the way we should do it, and set the stage, set the protocols, and do it the right way. I think that's going to be so important as we move forward. But I really think, like I said, it really comes back to having that relationship with the medical people and really leaning on them to educate yourself, and letting the science and letting the medical people dictate the protocols, not trying to say this is what I want to do because we want to do it.
Alberto, you made a great point about leagues learning from each other and sharing, and this is not the time to hold tight to your intellectual property that you've developed. It's the time for the greater good of sport to share your best practices with others. One of the things we see in world football, in soccer, that we don't see in the US leagues is that there are instances where stadium security or local police will have staggered arrival and departure times and paths for away fans, for home fans. So it's not unusual for away fans to have to sit in a stadium for 30 minutes after a game to let the home crowd dissipate to try and prevent, violence or fights or things like that. But, aside from things like entering and exiting, what do you think leagues are able to learn from each other in terms of the possibility of reintroducing spectators at some point?
I mean, first of all, of course, there's been a bit of a short-term goal in terms of priorities for all the leagues, during the past weeks. And the priority was to resume competition at any cost, not at any cost, but the first to safeguard the health of all those involved, but most importantly, to try to resume the competition. And if this was behind closed doors, it has to be behind closed doors, and this is a given fact, So that this will be, let's say, it's still a bit premature because really, I mean, look, if we look at the map that I showed you before, there are just 2 leagues that started, So most of the leagues at the moment, they are still struggling to hand out the protocols of their negotiation with the respective governments to play behind closed doors, So, but with no doubt, during the summer, there will be definitely pressure from competition organizer, fans groups, or whatever, to have, let's say, a transition phase, because there will definitely be a transition phase, and this transition phase will be different from country to country for the reason we explained before backing to, let's say, full capacity. I wouldn't be surprised if we will have a lot of creative ideas coming, especially for the medium and small leagues. For the reason I told you before, is more important for them from our revenue point of view in terms of their revenue breakdown depends and rely more on fans at the stadium, And sometimes the smaller the leagues are, the more creative they are because they have less means and therefore they have to bring some creative ideas. It is interesting to stress in the case because you were talking before about bringing fun atmosphere. We are in touch with the fans organization on a weekly basis. I mean, there are 2 official fan organizations in Europe. One is called Fan Supported Europe. The other one is Supported Direct Europe. We are in touch with them, and they are doing a good work in coordinating all the fans group all over Europe. It's interesting also to listen to their opinion and their position because sometimes the more core fans group, they are kind of against fake atmospheres because they believe that sport without fans it doesn't exist. So that we have to assume sometimes that the fans in this phase they are not allowed, and better to realize that and instead of having fake atmosphere within the stadium. And we have also to respect this position. It's impossible to have, let's say, also for the fans, from what I learned from them, to have a proper, let's say, European position. Why? Because they have to respect whatever fans group they might develop with their respective clubs. But it's also interesting to understand what is the position of this fans organization, because they are playing, as Jonathan was saying, they are also behaving quite well, despite they might be against the fact that football is playing behind closed doors. They also have a good understanding that their assumption is football is needed for the whole economy of the sport, so that they are not causing problems, they are not causing organizing, polemics, attitudes. So that, but on the other hand, we have also to listen to them. It's fundamental, the cooperation with fans organization for the European leagues, but also for all our leagues at domestic level. But it's a bit premature. I'm pretty sure. I mean, we internally we have created already a task force. Actually, we will meet the first time next week. It was a mix of medium and small leagues and big leagues, exactly to discuss how to bring fans back in a stadium with limited capacity. We will start this conversation during the upcoming days. It would be interesting to have another conversation, another webinar like this, maybe in a couple of months' times, to discuss about how will football will be, let's say, at the beginning of next season.
I think that's a great point. And Jonathan, let me bring you into this.
Can I add just one thing? It's related to, but it came across my mind. It's related to what Alberto said. there's also a big discussion around here with in what concerns celebrations when there is a champion, and the fact that people, when their own team wins, they can end up celebrating in the streets. And there's also being discussed the issue of at least the last games of the season being broadcasted on free live TV instead of cable, so that people can watch their games at home instead of going and get together in restaurants or terraces around the city. So there's a lot of concern and discussions now also about this, because you might have games on closed doors, but if people end up celebrating in the streets, that would be also a health problem and a security problem for everyone.
If I make a comment on this point here, the communication from the clubs especially will be very important. Yeah, usually fans are not very much keen maybe to listen politician or to listen federation or to listen leagues manager or leagues executives, but they are more keen to listen their own clubs. You know, so that I guess that clubs here, that will have to take their responsibility, use their players, use their coaches to speak to the fans and communicate these kind of messages to them, because fans are definitely more sensitive to listen when they're, let's say, where their idols can speak or the clubs can speak instead of let's say institution, whether are governmental or sport institution.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. There's two other topics I want to try and get to before we run out of time. One has to do with the interaction with players and getting them back to the pitch, and the other has to do with contracts. So let's get the legal part of it out of the way first. Jonathan, I know you had mentioned that the Bundesliga and the DFL is really pushing to try to finish the league by the end of June, and there's a really important reason for that. There's also some issues that may come up as relegation and promotion playoffs may extend a little bit into July. Can you talk a little bit about some of the contractual issues that we may be dealing with because of players' contracts, coaches' contracts that may be written to expire at the end of June?
Yeah, sure. That very important point, and I think Alberto also touched this point before. As in Germany, and I think in the most European leagues, the season is classically goes until end of June, and so nearly all our contracts have a duration until end of June of a certain year, which also is in line with the FIFA regulations on the status and transfer of players. And yeah, so we the clubs and DFL, we really hoped, and right now we're still optimistic to end the season in its largest part before end of June, because otherwise you really, you have to evaluate and maybe argue legally whether a contract might be extended into July or not. And we've got FIFA's guidelines setting the principle that there should be priority to the club where the player is right now. But on the other hand, we have got, especially in Germany, a very strict labor law, which unthinkable to oblige a player to extend his employment contract against his will. We can't do that. So that's why the clubs right now are already trying to handle with their players who will be free agents from 1st of July, and to find solutions where the contracts might be extended until the day of the last match. And for example, I think I can say we in Stuttgart, we are given priority to the players we have got on loan until end of June to find a solution there with their original club and the players. And until today, I can say that most clubs, or I think all clubs, are quite really want to collaborate on this point, because everybody in the end has the same interests. And yeah, legally, I think that's really important to ensure the situations, because in Bundesliga we have teams who will have 15 free agents as of July 1st, and if these teams have to go to the play-down playoffs or the relegation playoffs, that might really cause trouble. So that's why we
it's
were
not just in theory. I
focused
mean,
on this date.
You mentioned when we were talking the other day the case of Fortuna Düsseldorf. So for those who don't know, in Germany there's 18 teams. 17 and 18th place go directly down to a lower league and are replaced by the first and the second teams in the second league. But they have a really cool situation where the 16th team in the Bundesliga plays home and away against the third team in the second Bundesliga to see which team is up and which team is down. And you mentioned with Fortuna Düsseldorf, they're in a position right now where they would be expected to play that relegation series against an opponent for their survival in the first league. It could be against Stuttgart or another top team, and yet 15 of their players contractually they're done on June 30th, so it could have a huge impact on the sporting merits of the way things shake out.
Absolutely, and I think that this really touches the integrity of the sporting competition. If a club would lose his best players for the decisive match, that everybody agrees that shouldn't be the case, but to get to this aim, you have to find, I think, or according to our labor law, you absolutely have to find an agreement, because you can't force the player to stay against his will. That won't work.
We're lucky. We have collective bargaining agreements.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, you are.
Well, Dr. Levis, let me ask you a quick question. We've talked a lot about soccer today, and I know you're familiar with the game. You're a baseball guy, a hockey guy. You know a lot about different sports. As we're looking in a particular match, in the scenarios you would expect, whether that's celebrations, whether that's two people battling for a header, what are the types of events within a sporting competition that you fear would have the most risk for transmission?
I don't know that you could single out any one type. You've got a lot of people in close contact repeatedly, and they're all breathing pretty heavily. So if you have a virus, you would be expelling a lot of it. Any of those things, like think about a huddle in a football game, any of those kind of things where you have people close together is going to increase that risk. And I think in most of the sports that we look at, a big part of the game is some combination of players coming together. I think baseball might be the only one where you have everybody that stays fairly spread out during the game. But every other sport, you wind up having a bunch of people going after a ball or whatever it is. And so those are the kind of things that are going to increase the risk. But you're talking about people that are out there for a couple hours, plus pregame warm-ups and all those sort of things. So it's not like you could isolate just one part of the sport and make it safer without actually changing the sport itself. So I think that's the challenge we have, is there are certain things that are going to have risk. There is no way to completely eliminate that risk. We want to mitigate that as much as possible. But for many of these sports, we just have to accept that if we're going to play them the way they're designed by the rules, there is going to be that risk of transmission in various times throughout that game.
So I'm gonna take that point, and I'm gonna ask a final question. Let everybody who would like to chime in on that question. And so we may go a few minutes over, but we'll bring this to a close pretty soon. There have been a lot of issues raised about what is the acceptable level of risk for sport. There have been some prominent American athletes, some baseball players who have said that they're not interested in being segregated from their families for 2 months at a time. We've had a Chelsea midfielder, N'Golo Kante, said that he's probably not going to return to training or play matches because his family has a history of heart disease. A striker for Watford, their team captain, in fact, Troy Deeney, said he may stay away from team training because he has a newborn son at home. So there are a whole lot of issues that individual athletes may have. I know the Bundesliga has said that we're not going to force anybody to play. If somebody wants to stay home, if they feel that they have issues, they'll be encouraged to do that. Chelsea's athlete has the support of his team behind him. But how do we, as as people who work on the team side or who work for athletes and unions, how do we focus on player health and safety and getting players to buy into coming back to play? Anyone?
Well, let me answer something here. I think this is a challenge we're not just facing in sports. We're facing this in every segment of society. At the university, we're having the same issues. What if a professor doesn't want to get up and teach a class because they have somebody at home that's high risk and they don't want to be exposed to their students? So I don't think this is really something that's unique to sport. This is the challenge of people looking at their own individual risk and deciding what's best for them. And I think we have to put that first. Yes, we want these leagues to go back to the way they were, but if the star on your team lives with his elderly mother and is concerned about bringing a disease home and killing her, I don't think you could fault a person for that. You have to respect those decisions. They're making individual decisions about their own employment. We can do everything we can to reduce that risk, but they still have to make that risk-benefit calculation in their head and decide that it's worth it for them to participate in their job, whatever it is, whether it's sports or not.
Yep.
I would agree. I'm working with a couple companies on return to work programs and protocols. I think Dr. Labus just hit it right on the head.
All right, so let me ask a different final question. I think that was a good one.
I'll try not to answer it perfectly next time.
No, I thought that was an excellent way to say it. So we've seen a lot of changes to sports as a result of trying to get back to play. Some of them have been rule changes. In Germany, for example, well, not just Germany, but World Soccer, we're seeing that you can use 5 substitutes during a match instead of 3 to try to give people a little bit more of a rest as we play more games in a shortened period of time. I know that the league in Germany also had encouraged teams to increase the size of the squad to bring in their best youth prospects or people from the reserve team, so that if you lost a chunk of, say, 5 players, that matches could continue to be played. Some of these changes may be temporary, and when hopefully COVID is eradicated or there's a vaccine, we'll see those changes go away. But what changes do you see that may be permanent? How has COVID potentially permanently changed professional sports?
It's probably too early to say. What is important to stress is the flexibility of sport institutions to model their own sporting regulation to allow the competition to resume. That's the most important things. I mean, football and soccer in general is quite a conservative sport, as you are aware. I mean, if you consider who are the ones, let's say, making the law of the games at IFAB, that are, let's say, the federation coming from UK in general, there's a lot of conservative spirit, so that I would say that most of the normal rules will back on track once this period will be over, but on the other hand, it's a period where we can also experiment some new things, and we will learn from experience as usual.
I wouldn't, let me add one more thing. I wouldn't be surprised that if the rule that you mentioned about the 5 substitutions would be here to stay in terms of soccer. I think it will stay.
I think it sure has a chance. Well, everybody, let me thank you so much for participating in our panel today. Thanks to everybody who joined us. We had it at a point in time over 100 people from all around the world join us, and that's very exciting for all of us. But I thank you all for especially the panelists, for your preparation and your time today. It was great to have so many different perspectives from different backgrounds, from different locations, and so thank you all. I also want to thank again Colette from the UIA for putting everything together, and on behalf of Jerry, Fernando, and myself, if any of you are interested in getting involved with the UIA Sports Law Commission, we'd love to have you involved and invite you to future programs. Please feel free to reach out to either of us at any time. Again, thanks so much to everybody for attending. Maybe let's get the band back together in a month or two and see how things look then, and we can have a follow-up on this, because I think it'd be very interesting to look back with some time perspective to see how things look in the future. Again, thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Ciao.